Welcome, Mackenzie.
Welcome, Ian.
How are you doing today?
Good. I'm feeling good about all the stuff we put together for today, and I think it's going to be a good show, good conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited about this too.
Have this music.
Yeah, I know it's fun. Like this is becoming an exciting little forum for learning. What's new with you?
Lots of election stuff.
Yeah.
New job potentially. How about you?
I've been very busy with teaching teachers lately in this school, so that's been really fun and exciting, actually. So I've been doing that a lot. And then, of course, we've also been looking at fracking quite a bit more too. And we've got some special stuff for folks tonight. Let me just progress into it a little bit. So we've got a group of videos. And do you want to introduce these a little bit, or should we dive into them a little bit? And for folks in the audience, feel free to say hello, introduce yourself, share if there's a video that you want us to focus on first. Let us know. We've got the first video, which is an overview video. Maybe we want to start with that a little bit.
Yeah, an overview would be nice. I mean, I can just briefly say that this is a press conference held in Harrisburg, which is Pennsylvania state capital. And Senator Katie Muth is the one that put it together, and it just combines a bunch of different people who are working on this issue of radioactive waste and the loopholes and regulation that the oil and gas, particularly the gas industry in Pennsylvania, since that's the one that's the biggest right now, have and what impact it's having on workers. So we have some workers who are whistleblowers, a journalist, someone working for the Environmental Health Project. I don't know if we have a video of that, but she's also part of this. And then a few different representatives that are also speaking. So yeah, I can jump into the first one, perhaps.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here in the Capitol Media Center here in Harrisburg. I am State Senator Katie Muth, and I'm honored to stand here today with two of several brave workers that have come forward to talk about the horrific working conditions they were subject to as former workers of a fracking wastewater treatment facility in Williamsport called Eureka Resources, and honored to partner with Public Herald, Josh Probanik, Melissa Troutman, all of the investigative journalists who have put in their time and effort to really continue the coverage on this issue. This is many years in the making that Public Herald has done intense research, getting right to know request data from the various regulators that are supposed to ensure accountability and safety, showing that Pennsylvania's oil and gas industry has a radioactive problem that is not just toxic to the public and our waterways and our soil and air, but also to workers who are often rarely informed about the working conditions that they are in day to day. And again, this is a very controversial for some issue in this building, as a bipartisan love affair has existed for the oil and gas petrochemical industry in Pennsylvania for many, many years. And I think the one thing, regardless of how you feel about fracking or chemical manufacturing or any kind of fossil fuel energy extraction, is that the harm that happens to the public and the workers has to stop. And again,
let's take just a moment here and share what we're noticing already. And folks in the chat, feel free to share what you're noticing. Mackenzie, I see you just said this.
Yeah. I think I mentioned this last time we talked about it too, but I think it's really important that she, mentions this is nonpartisan, and often the industry likes to divide parties and, divide people based on party and make people believe that, any sort of like inquiry into business practices like isn't a Republican value at times. And, I think that she's right, in my opinion, that corruption prevents a lot of action, and that exists in both parties and even in independents too.
So I'm hearing that from you that you're saying her perspective is that it's a nonpartisan issue, that it exists in all parties, this corruption, even independents potentially.
Mhm.
Yeah, if you're just coming into the room, feel free to say hi and share what you notice in the chat as we go. I'll play again.
As I mentioned, it's incredibly brave of those who are willing to come forward to talk about this, knowing that they themselves and their family, because when you work in these facilities, you bring home what you work with. And so if you are not informed about the toxins and the radioactive materials that you're processing at your own job, as you would, say, in a nuclear power plant, which is very regulated and has tremendous worker protections compared to the oil and gas industry, you bring home your work boots, your work clothes, you put those in your washer and dryer. All of these things can not only contaminate you as the worker in these facilities, but also your family and friends. And research is decades long of how this radioactive exposure literally leads to human harm and even death.
So what's everyone noticing? I see you just said nuclear power plants have more protections for workers than oil and gas.
Mhm. Yeah, I've heard this described several different times, like, for example, scientists have been quoted in some of this investigative journalism work saying that, um, if they were to spill a radioactive material in their lab that, emitted the same radiation as some of this oil and gas waste, that they like could be in a lot of trouble. They, would have to go through all sorts of very strict protocols to make sure that the waste is remediated and like could lose their job, could have to, like spend a ton of money to clean up this waste. And then similarly with nuclear power plants, like things are very tightly regulated, but for some reason, um, in the oil and gas industry, that's not the case. And workers are not wearing protective equipment the majority of the time, according to these whistleblowers that we have and like other sources. And why is that?
Yeah, it's so I'm hearing from you that there's a lot of like I'm hearing about not having protective equipment. I'm hearing about how hard it is to be a whistleblower in this space. I'm hearing uh, and I'm hearing that in and I think does Justin Noble talk about this as well? About that if you were to spill chemicals in a lab, the same like chemicals in a lab setting, and you were a chemist, you could go to jail, but they're putting stuff in public places.
Yeah. We could try to find the actual quote because that's a scientist that he works with pretty frequently, who I think like specializes in radiation chemistry. Said that I'm not sure if they would go to jail, but there would definitely be lots of repercussions and like um, protective steps taken if that were the case.
That so yeah, like there's a lot of steps involved in protecting work. And now I see Rachel is saying, is there a way to lobby for the workers?
Yeah, it's a good question.
So that's another puzzle we should add to our list of puzzles.
Yeah, I'll be on it right now.
And some Maple Marianne Osterbrink says, I'm thinking nukes have federal regulations. FF not. FF is in fracking or
Fossil fuels, probably.
fossil fuels. States vary greatly on basic labor laws. Fed equals bare bones. So do we want to play another one of these clips we've got? For instance, if you're in the audience, feel free to suggest one. For instance, you can see right now, this is one of the people who worked in a fracking water, it's a water brine or fracking brine. What would you call it exactly? Like a
treatment plant, I guess. I mean,
yeah, treatment plant, like a treatment plant.
They say
yeah,
it.
right. Yeah, so-called treatment plant. And Jay says, "Hi, hello, friends. Hello, Jay. Welcome." So glad, and yeah, so glad that Jay, Rachel, Maple, everybody's joining us tonight. And Maple says that brine is radioactive.
Sure is.
And then now over here we have a journalist. Let me see if I can remember his name off the top of my head. This is the journalist you were talking about earlier on the left.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to think of it for a second?
Let's see. Well, I can figure it out. Josh Probanik.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Josh Probanik. So he's done a lot of stuff in this. Is there any preference for anything here? Guess we could. Josh's opening statement's very long, and it's about like many of the dangers of fracking, and he's exploring what it is from the journalistic perspective. But we also could look at the account of Eric Steppe as well, who was a worker there. Any preferences?
Yeah, I think Eric's account really is a good way to start, like from like the firsthand, primary source, I guess you could say, account. Like it really paints you a picture of what's going on, and Josh goes more into the details and like what he has tried to do through his investigative journalism, but been unsuccessful because of lack of cooperation from the DEP or the governor or attorney general. So
yeah, he mentions that a bit. Let's start off with Eric. And as we're going through here, share in the chat what you notice, or if there's anything that's puzzling you in this, you can also share any puzzles that you notice.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Eric Steppe. We and my fellow co-workers submitted a letter to the Attorney General, Marguerite Quinn, and the Lycoming County DA, Ryan Gardner. And I'm going to read a little bit from that right now. We are writing to request a criminal misconduct investigation as well as an environmental crimes investigation of Eureka Resources, LLC, as well as criminal misconduct investigation of the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, the Wilkes-Barre OSHA office, and the Williamsport Bureau of Codes for willful neglect related to these matters. Over the past year, we have experienced working in an unsafe work environment. We have been subjected to continual gas inhalation, methanol byproducts, carbon monoxide, H2S gas, etc., radiation, exposure, which has sickened several of the workers, and constant exposure to poorly maintained, highly pressurized vessels containing hot gases and caustics. In 2022, a Y-Sox worker's last several hours spent on this earth was experiencing the most pain that any human could ever attempt to imagine as his skin was melted off his body. Think about that. Of what injuries were recorded and documented, a personal friend of mine, Brandon Barrett, was exposed to H2S gas, became ill and disoriented. He had visibly blue lips that I saw with my own eyes and uncontrolled drooling during the event. and had to drive himself to the Urgy Center to receive the immediate health care that he needed. Myself, Eric Steppe, was directly exposed to carbon monoxide gas and H2S gas. I became extremely ill and having to be driven to the UPMC ER for immediate healthcare needs. And I'd like to make a note that coincidentally, there is an appearance of impropriety and conflict of interest at the Williamsport Sanitary Authority, as a Eureka Resources LLC owner is the current vice chair of the board. Ain't that convenient? And I want to ask everybody here, do you know what it feels like to be all alone? That there is no one to have your backs, that there is no one in the government who will help? Do you know what it feels like to be gaslit by the very government agencies you pay taxes to? That personally pisses me off. To be told there is nothing to see, your concerns are an illusion. These issues and serious questions don't matter. That is how we felt. Nothing happened, nothing, until an OSHA whistleblower complaint was actually filed with the Department of Labor against OSHA. I'll ask that you please reference the Project T-Norm report from the Public Herald for more details. I'd also like to read our demands. To assure health and safety, environmental protections, and accountability, we demand the following. 1, the tendered resignations of the Wilkes-Barre OSHA area manager and field inspector. 4, willful neglect and a perceived disdain for any health and safety whistleblower outlining numerous dangerous conditions surrounding this facility.
So I want to talk now. What are folks noticing so far? The last thing Mackenzie posted was hydrogen sulfide, methanol, hot pressurized gas are some of the hazards he mentioned. He wants the resignation of Wilkes-Barre OSHA manager and field inspector. I see Maple Marianne Osterbrink says a major piece to fracking disaster is the Halliburton loophole. Bush era law still prevents cores having to reveal cancerous chemicals, benzene, etc., in fracking process. Doing so would have made fracking unallowable. Bills have been submitted since, but not passed by corrupt, pathetic members of Congress. And Mackenzie said, Williamsport is Lycoming County, where the Eureka Resources plant that he worked at is located. Are there any other things, folks? Oh, I see Jay said his outrage and frustration are palpable. So Jay's noticing his outrage and his frustration. And got it. Marianne Osterbrink wants to clarify that when she says corp, she means corporations. I took it as a core of workers or something. So Bush era law still prevents corporations having to reveal cancerous chemicals. So anything else we want to share that we're noticing before I play more of the video?
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about the Halliburton loophole. I have some of our puzzles, or they're talking about regulatory loopholes, and there's actually a lot of different regulatory loopholes. There's also a loophole in the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, sometimes called RCRA, which was passed like in the late 70s or early 80s. And I think it's called like the Bensel and Bevel exemption, which is a really funny name to me. But which says that oil and gas waste is exempt from being considered hazardous, like no matter what the chemical makeup of it is. Yeah, and I feel like there was a lot in that that video. It's like a lot to emotionally digest, and then also like information wise to digest. So yeah, he said that there was a worker who died. That worker was not at the plant that he worked at, but a different plant owned by the same company, which is in a different part of Pennsylvania. And we talked about him last time. I think his name is Jeremy Lanzo, and he died due to, I think it was like hot gas that like burned his skin off, as he was saying. So you
Yeah,
know,
that was really a haunting graphic detail.
yeah. So the company has had OSHA violations before. Obviously, like a death is very serious, clearly. And this isn't even like going into the potential radiation exposure. It's just, you know, hazards that could be in any sort of plant, like we were saying, gases and hot work.
Yeah, like in the case of Eric, he was talking about what was it, CO2?
I think he said carbon monoxide, which is
Carbon monoxide, yeah. And I think at some point he talks about that in more depth somewhere, but it may not. I can't remember if it's in this one or not. But that was kind of wild as well.
Yeah, I mean, he mentions his coworkers like lips turning blue, and I think that that might be a symptom of carbon monoxide exposure. I know that, you know, it makes it very difficult to breathe. If you've heard of people dying from carbon monoxide poisoning, it binds to the heme in your blood, I want to say, and like prevents oxygen from being carried through your blood.
Well, yeah, that and so there's a lot of hazards here. So should we play a little bit more?
Do we have any more questions?
Yeah, any more questions or puzzles or anything?
I don't see any.
Okay. Yeah, let's keep playing.
This will attempt to restore the trust in this institution. 2, freeze redevelopment capital program grant funding being provided to Eureka Resources LLC by the state, as there have been over 16 OSHA safety complaints and violations recorded over the last 8 years alone. And this historical performance should not be funded by the taxpayers. 3, an RTKL audit of the Williamsport Bureau of Codes to root out the willful neglect and violation of statutes protecting the body politic and their right to transparency, particularly surrounding this facility.
So what are we noticing about the different demands that they're making so far?
Yeah, I didn't notice this the first time. I'm trying to put it in the chat, but he says that there's a redevelopment grant that comes from the state, which Eureka Resources gets, that's funded by taxpayers. And he, you know, believes that it should stop because, like, I don't really see this as redevelopment, and clearly he does not. Yeah, I missed the demand after that, though. It was.
Should we just roll back a little bit to it? Let's see. Hold on. Oops, let me see. Actually, I think I just let's go back here.
4, knowing
the tricky thing here is, oh, there we go. Okay, is that this little bar here is a little bit lower. So let's see here.
Complaints and violations recorded over the last 8 years alone. and this historical performance should not be funded by the taxpayers. 3, an RTKL audit of the Williamsport Bureau of Codes to root out the willful neglect and violation of statutes protecting the body politic and their right to transparency, particularly surrounding this facility. 4, knowing the radiation that we are being exposed to, having badges and dosimeters to measure dangerous levels of radiation, and a plan for workers who are overexposed. And 5, stop the state from turning a blind eye to point source pollution, petroleum in the distillate water being exported from a facility to the Williamsport Sewer District, and addressing that a Eureka Resources LLC owner sits on the water board, creating yet another conflict of interest. 6, assuring appropriate building and vessel ventilation and building code compliance to prevent methanol, H2S, hydrogen chlorine gas exposure, and poisoning risks to Pennsylvania workers. And 7, assure a full-time, full shift manager is present at all times in this overlooked labor segment that involves pressurized vessels, radiation, toxic gases, and caustics. I'd like to give you guys
Yeah, there was a lot there. I think that, was it the acronym RTKL? I looked it up. It's right to know law.
They've mentioned that before, even.
I didn't know what he meant at first.
What are people noticing here? What are we noticing? I put up that some of the demands were like addressing the gas risk and all those gases you had mentioned before.
Yes.
Jay says, assure a full-time shift manager is watching full-time radiation vessels and other inspected areas.
Yeah, so he went through the gas risks again. And to me, like, you know, them covering up the radiation, I expect, because, you know, the research we've been doing, it's covered up at like almost every level of industry and regulatory bodies. But to not ensure proper ventilation in like building codes in a plant environment is just like a basic thing that no matter what industry you're in, like you are expected to do. And it's unacceptable to have exposure to methanol. Methanol can cause blindness. If you've heard of like methanol poisoning from drinking alcohol that has methanol in it. And like it being in a gas form is very dangerous. HCl gas, hydrogen chloride gas, is very dangerous. So is hydrogen sulfide. It has lots of health impacts. Carbon monoxide gas, you know, we have carbon monoxide detectors in our homes because it can kill you. So like this place just seems full of hazards, whether they're, you know, from gas or radiation or heat or any of these different sources. So I can't imagine working there and trying to be safe.
Yeah, Jay says you can't smell H2S as well, which can kill you quickly.
I'm not sure that's true. I feel like H2S is actually very smelly. Carbon monoxide is the one that's not smelly. As far as I'm aware. Because I'm pretty sure that H2S is like the rotten egg smell. But correct me if I'm wrong. I'm gonna look it up real quick.
So yeah, is anybody else noticing anything else from here? Should we keep playing? Jay says, oh. Here, let's play a little bit more, shall we? We'll address that after we play. Jay says, thank you, Mackenzie. It's that it takes out your sense of smell.
Yeah. I've heard of that too.
paint you a picture of one of our experiences at Eureka Resources. So we have these pits there. They're 12 feet deep. There's 4 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4. They're called RT pits. They're constantly filled to the very lip of the top of the pit with frack water. And in that frack water is all these terrible things that I've been describing to you so far. So as they're sitting there, all the nasty stuff eventually sinks to the bottom and builds sludge, which Quinn and I have seen in person. So at the bottom of this pit, they drained it because they wanted to put a lid over it. And they got all the frack water out of it. And what was left was about 3 feet of this toxic sludge containing H2S gas, for one, and a former coworker of mine who's no longer at Eureka put his gear on. He had a mask on. He had a full face mask, a breather. He had gloves and boots. He had a Tyvek suit, and he was asked to go down into that pit. At first, he was going to have to fill the sludge into buckets and pull it out with a rope. But then they changed the idea that they were going to get a vacuum down there and suck the sludge out. So my coworker Dalton Trahan and I were standing on the catwalk above this pit. Now, visualize this. There's a broken hand crank winch to put to hook to a person's harness. Supposed to be safe to get them in and out of the pit. This was broken. And even if it was in the correct position, which it wasn't, so like if the pit's right here, there's girders across the top of the pit. The winch was on top of the girders. So that if you hook it to a person that's 12 feet down in this pit of hell, how are they supposed to get the guy up out of the pit? You can't. You can only get him to the top of the girders right here. And that was the problem we had. So what was Eureka's solution? Their solution was get a rope ladder, use a rope ladder, which still didn't come up out of the pit. It only came to the top of the girders. So my coworker's down there. He's being spotted by me and Dalton Trahan, okay? He's like, guys, I can't take anymore. His eyes boom like this. And he's lightheaded. He's starting to feel woozy. So we're like, get him out of there, get him out of there. This guy who is well over 200 pounds climbs up this oil and sludge covered rope ladder. And he gets to about almost to the top of the rope ladder. He reaches up and he grabs the girder, and he doesn't have the strength to pull himself out. So Dalton and I grab him. 2 guys, and Dalton's a big guy. We grab our friend and we reef him out of there, barely. It took everything the 2 of us had to get him out of there. If it wasn't for us, I don't know how they would have got him out of there. By the time, EMS or a rescue team would have got in there to help him, it would have been too late. Because I'm going to tell you this, we were standing above that pit, and just from him sucking up the sludge, everything that was released that was trapped in that sludge came up and hit Dalton and I. And the 2 of us were getting sick. And we were 12 feet above that thing. Imagine how my friend was that was down in it. Even though he had all his gear on, it still permeated him and affected him drastically. So yeah, I hope that gives you a visual. And Quinn was a part.
So let's take a pause here. What's everybody noticing about this? Like, he's talking, what's he talking about? What's his perspective? What's his point of view?
I think he's, trying to paint a picture of how deeply unsafe this working condition is and how his coworker very easily could have died, or, become very sick and not been able to be helped based on the, protective measures they had in place and the work practices that they had. And every time I hear this, what's so striking to me is he's talking about this different protective equipment that his coworker has So like a Tyvek suit. I think he had a respirator on. Also, I'm not sure if that's like there's different classes of respirators. There are ones that are similar to like N95 mask that like have like cartridges on the side that will filter out particles. And then there's like self-contained respirators. There's like all sorts of different levels. So I wonder like what type of respirator in particular it was. But like to be in a full suit and like have this protective equipment and still like be about to pass out, that tells you that this exposure is like well beyond what anybody should be exposed to. And like if protective equipment cannot keep you safe, like this is not a job responsibility that someone should have.
Yeah, it makes me think of like Chernobyl with all those people who went in there pretty much knowing they were going to die, right? Like, and like the dehumanizing disregard that it forces upon life because somebody has to address these at some point. And so then it means that people walk into these situations. Mm-hmm. I see Tim says he's a good storyteller, horror story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen this several times now, but the first time I remember watching it, like it was very much a horror story for me.
Does anyone notice anything else before we play more? Any puzzles you want us to be considering?
Part of this. After this, they wanted us to go back in there because we couldn't finish the job. They wanted us to go down in there and do it again. We refused. We filed a stop work clause. At that time, our plant manager comes out and he mocks us as a group. And he stands there in front of us and he calls us pussies. He says, I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe. I don't want to go do my job because I don't have the balls to go do it. That's what we were confronted with. Did not once show an ounce of concern for the safety of his employees. As my buddy sat there after he got out of that pit and he just was glazed over, covered in filth and sludge and toxicity. Didn't even care. He did not care. Instead, he just wanted to belittle us and make us feel incompetent and like absolute crap. So I'm going to end with this.
What are folks noticing now?
My thought is, why didn't the manager get on and do it himself if he thought it was such an easy job?
It's an interesting question, right? Like, I'm going to sound like a broken record because I'm bringing up Isabel Wilkerson's cast yet again. But it's fascinating to me how people in caste systems know that they're making other people do things that are bad, but they tell themselves they have to keep their job or whatever. So it's an interesting question, right? Because I would also ask, does the manager know how bad it is and they're just suckering their workers because the situation is economically convenient from them and they think that they're going to find a way out of it safely themselves?
Yeah, the manipulation is really, really horrible too. I mean, like to, like question these people's like work ethic and their masculinity even, and like try to use all of these like nefarious tactics to get them to do what he wants them to do instead of, like trying to address any of the problems. Like clearly he either feels like it's not a problem or feels like there's no way to address the problem. So he has to resort to these, like emotional warfare tactics.
Yeah, Tim Martin says maybe the boss's boss was Donald Trump.
Perhaps.
I want to just read a couple comments that we didn't read out loud before. They came during the stream, but we didn't read them out loud. Maple says, old and decrepit, non-inclusive U.S. Constitution allows profit over anything else after over 200 years of precedents, which makes it almost impossible to win against harmful projects. Commerce Clause has superseded federal wetlands and endangered species laws, such as for FERC permits. And she reminds me that we met there. And Jay says from national from NIH, H25 has been referred to as the knockdown gas because inhalation of high concentrations can cause immediate loss of consciousness and death. However, prolonged exposure to lower concentrations, such as 100 to 500 parts per million, can cause various respiratory symptoms that range from rhinitis to acute respiratory failure. At extreme high levels, a person can lose their ability to smell the gas and become aware of its presence. This condition, known as olfactory fatigue, can also occur when people have been exposed to hydrogen sulfide for a long period of time.
Yeah. Now that you're saying it, I understand what you meant at first. I read in Amity and Prosperity, which it's a nice way to drop this. We're gonna plan to read as part of a book club to investigate some of this more and how it impacts, community members instead of workers. I mean, workers are still community members, but people that are living near fracking infrastructure.
Mackenzie, what book club? Tell me more.
Yeah, wait. So when are we starting this?
Do we want to do it next week or the week after? We're starting Nora Ericott on Sunday, by the way. So on Sunday, we'll be reading Nora Ericott's Justice for Some and Amity and Prosperity. Yeah, and so do you want to start that next week or the week after? What do you think, Mackenzie?
I think we were originally agreeing on the 25th, right? So the week after.
Yes, so we'll be starting it the week after then. And so you'll have 2 more weeks. But if you want to join our book club, we're just reading the first chapter. So send us a message. Let us know that you want to join, and we'll make sure to loop you in. You can even just send a message here.
Yeah. Amity and Prosperity by Eliza Griswold.
Winner of the Pulitzer Prize. More than once, I think.
I don't know.
And I hear Tim saying, how much would it cost to do the job safely? So this is another useful puzzle, right? Well, how much does it cost to do this job safely? Can they even afford it?
Yeah. But okay, go back to Jay's comment really fast. Like olfactory fatigue. So this like fatigue of your like sense of smell is something that the family in Amity in Prosperity experiences also living next to fracking infrastructure. They're at some point unable to smell. I think it is hydrogen sulfide also that they're exposed to, or yeah, that sounds right to me. There was a lot of like foul smelling things, and then like they realized over time that they couldn't smell it anymore because I guess either of this exposure over time or a combination of that with the concentration. Because you said 10 parts per million to 500 parts per million is what NIH said, and like 10 parts per million is not a super high concentration really even. So it seems like there's acute effects at a pretty low concentration.
Yeah. So also Maple says worker resistance to heat deaths and poisons like this is slowly bubbling up, and I believe it's going to save us, working class, as merging climate and labor movement. Recall Texas mail carrier died from no water break allowed last summer. Recent demands for air-conditioned vans by UPS Teamsters. Also, Amazon Prime drivers actually walked out here in Durham and more around 2019 over wanting less emissions vehicles. And Tim says, yes, Maple, that's why Declare Emergency did their last action on the Constitution. And Jay says, ooh, Ambient Prosperity, what a name. And then I mentioned that it's Amity. And Jay said, Amity. Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, it's named after 2 towns in Washington County that are right next to each other. It's actually kind of poetic that they're named Amity and Prosperity
Yeah.
based on the topic of the book.
Hint, it's a sad poem.
Yeah.
And Maple says, by the way, book Fight the Constitution by my DSA Marxist Unity group available on Barnes and Noble. And Jay says, amazing question, Tim. Also, can we afford it, both financial and in a wider sense, right? What are the impacts of this? How far do they spread?
Yeah. You know, I'm not sure where I was seeing this, but I think it might have been that a former like oil worker in Louisiana, I want to say, and he was saying that often like to provide this protective equipment, it's really not that expensive. It might be like $25 per worker to have a respirator and or some sort of mask and maybe like a Tyvek suit and like on a wider sense, like environmental cost and the cost of like considering this waste as hazardous and being a lot more strict with the regulation would cost a lot. But to provide these basic worker protections, it really doesn't cost that much at all. And it is just like such a revelation about how the industry treats its workers as disposable. And I think that that's what the state senators and state representatives are really trying to get at here is that like even if you think that the oil and gas industry should still exist or believe that maybe they should not have to have a ton of regulation, like to just not provide protective equipment for your workers and not tell them what they're being exposed to is something that none of us should accept, like regardless of your beliefs about the industry. And I think that's what they're really trying to get across here.
Yeah. So it's I'm hearing actually let's see. I was reading in the comments a little bit. I'm hearing someone mention that they can't see all of Tim's comments. That's true because we're on Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube. And so Tim's on Discord and Maple's on Facebook. So that's why we share the comments that way. So do we want to play a little bit? Do we want to finish up the video now and then wrap up?
Sure.
Okay, cool.
Is there still more of Eric's?
Yeah, I think that's the last little bit of it.
I am aware of waters in the Commonwealth that have been polluted by Eureka Resources. I have seen it. I have seen oil in the distillate because that was one of the things that we tested on a daily basis, multiple times a day. Hey, boss, I got a beaker in my hand. Why is there oil in this distilled water? Which they said we could drink. Smells like there's all kinds of bad stuff in it. Doesn't smell like distilled water to me. They would say to us, well, you could drink it, but I don't recommend it. So I went into his office and I showed him this beaker, and it looked like somebody dumped canola oil in it. He said, don't you ever talk about oil being in the distillate. We don't talk about that. I said, what do you mean? It's right here. I test it every time I go and do my rounds. I test this water. There's oil in it in 2 different spots where we test it. There's always going to be oil in the distillate, he said. We don't talk about that. Keep your mouth shut. That's what I was told. He also asked me to put my phone on the desk because, quote, people have a tendency to record things around here. I'm angry. Thank you.
What are folks noticing about what Eric said?
What are you noticing, BA? I've been talking too much.
I mean, I mean, I noticed oil, like he said, the boss was like, "Don't you ever talk about oil being in the distillate?" And then he was like, "Oh, but there's always going to be oil in the distillate." Uh, and and it's like, what a it's very upsetting and corrupt.
Yeah. I think it was interesting that he, was trying to take his phone away from him too. Like, it just shows you that there's definitely a level of paranoia that this guy is experiencing. And like he knows that they're not doing things the right way, clearly, because he's trying all these different tactics to, prevent people from speaking out on it, apparently.
Yeah, what would you say the point of view of the boss is?
Yeah, I'm not sure if he, you know, wants to protect the industry, but he clearly knows that he has something to hide. And, maybe the boss above him is putting lots of pressure on him to make sure that things stay hidden, or, like he's also worried for his job and this is like how it's coming out. But it's interesting to think about what the motivations are.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, right? Because like at one point he's saying to them the water's drinkable, but I wouldn't recommend it. And then there's always going to be, oil in the water to some degree. There's very much like this kind of double think kind of thing going on. And is that like what you do to survive, or is that, as you're saying, is that what you're doing to survive, or is that like um, genuinely malicious or like aware? And Maple says, "Hey, tell the bosses to drink it like Obama's corrupt stunt at Flint drank alternate cheat water." And if folks do folks know about the context of that a little bit?
I don't actually. I mean, I know about Flint, obviously, but I wasn't aware that Obama tried to drink the water.
Yeah, let me show you. This is from CNN. Let me.
Been doing stunts here, but
Let me.
and
Sorry, I thought I was sharing it. Let me just play it again here really quickly.
it is. There you go. Generally I have not been doing stunts here, but and this used a filter. The water around this table, was plant water that was filtered, and it just confirms what we know scientifically, which is that if you're using a filter, if you're installing it, then Flint water at this point is drinkable. That does not, I want to repeat, negate the need for us to go ahead and replace some of these pipes, because ultimately you want a system in which you don't have to put a filter on it in order to be assured that it's safe.
It didn't even look like he actually drank it.
That's what everybody noticed about this when this clip first came out. Like Michael Moore featured this in one of his movies, and so yeah, so cheat water, as Maple says, and Tim says, I guess this is about the boss. How many employees has he fired for insubordination? That'd be an interesting measurement, right?
Yeah.
And then Tim says, pressure from above would explain a lot. I agree. And Tim says, doublethink explains it too. And Maple says, lying liar. I think that's about the president, Obama, in this case. Correct me if I'm wrong. So we're winding down in our time tonight. Do we have any last thoughts? Oh, yeah, right, like, Michael Moore did that too in Flint, I think. Uh, Bringing gross water to hearings has been a good tactic. Yeah, definitely asking the people to drink their own water, is like hypocrisy in action. Um, is there anything else we wanna share before we wrap up tonight? Um, w
Maybe we could go to some of the questions really quick.
yeah?
Just like, see if we have anything to add collectively here. Maybe not all of them. I'm talking about I like wrote a ton of questions down before we started
Oh, yeah,
today.
do you wanna take we can take a look at some like, you've got a question list here,
Yeah, it's
that is
quite
pretty
long.
amazing, actually, and so everybody should see this because this is, a big thing that, we can all work on together and start thinking about. So, Mackenzie, do you wanna kind of explain what's going on here to everyone so people can understand?
Sure, yeah. So I was just like struck by the fact that there's so many different aspects of this issue. Like there's lots of like scientific questions that I have. There's questions of like how do we resist the industry, or like what types of resistance methods can we use? What are the what are the
Right.
regulatory puzzles? Like what regulatory loopholes are there? What regulation would solve this issue? Is there regulation in other places that's working? And then, like what are the industry motivations? What's the history of the industries? How have they dealt with this issue historically? Has it existed for longer than fracking has existed? Has it also existed with oil drilling and conventional gas drilling? Um, and then can you zoom out for a second?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then what potential corruption issues are there, or complicity of different like the Department of Health or the Department of Environmental Protection, are they complicit, or like are they actively corrupt, or what's going on here? Why does it seem like nobody um can get the help that they need? So yeah, we could talk about.
Yeah, we don't actually have to look at it all right away. Yeah, because but I'm open to staying longer if you want to. It's up to you.
Maybe like 15 more minutes.
Okay, that sounds good. So, yeah, what do you want to explore here?
Yeah, so we talked about, I think that the workers' exposure kind of falls into like the health impacts, and then also the regulatory puzzles and the industry. And I think their whistleblowing is a form of resistance. So maybe, we could include that. Um, but we mentioned the Halliburton loophole, so maybe we can examine that in more detail.
Yeah.
Because that answers this first question. And then I also mentioned the exception to oil and gas waste in the resource conservation and
Yeah,
recovery.
right.
So
Do
we
you wanna
could.
explore those a little bit right now? Or do you
I
wanna, what are you thinking?
think that's maybe better suited for another day to go into like the. Unless you're excited about it.
No, no, I think it's okay. Just lead the way. 'Cause I see you've got a vision here, so I'd say go for it.
Yeah. So I think maybe we could explore that, or we could write in here like find some way to answer these questions and like organize the answers. Um, yeah, so let's move over to the health impacts. How about that?
Mhm.
Yeah, so a lot of this stuff is more focused on the radiation, and Eric talks mostly about different chemical exposures, like to gases and other hazards. But I think it's important to think about like what does doing this job safely mean? Is it possible to do this job safely? Um, And then, what are the routes of exposure to radium or radioactive material in these jobs? Like, are they breathing it in? Are they ingesting it because it's like on their hands and they're eating? Um, are they bringing it home with them? There's all sorts of different questions about exposure that, are possible to prove, but it's just very complex.
Well, it's important to know what challenging questions we're working on, even if we don't know all the answers yet.
Yeah. Yeah, so a lot of this stuff is focused more on understanding the health impacts from radiation than I want to get into these cases of Ewing sarcoma that we've had. It's a childhood cancer that's very rare. And there's, this history of work that's been done trying to investigate whether radioactive gas waste has a cause in it. And, the current evidence says that it does not, but many people are skeptical of that evidence. And, I want to look into that in a very scientific and like judicious way and try to figure out, is it just that the research has never been done, or is there like valid evidence that suggests that, it doesn't have an environmental cause? Because it's an extremely rare cancer, and there were 28 cases in one county or several neighboring counties. It's 200 to 250 cases nationally every year. So, the parents of these children, some of whom have died, they know in their bones that there's something going on, and they don't accept this explanation because they're saying that that it isn't a cancer cluster and that there's not enough statistical evidence, but there was a 125% increase in occurrence of this cancer. So part of me is wondering, is the framework for deciding this flawed? Like, is this something that, is even possible to really know based on the data? Like, what is the scientific rationale for these things? And like epidemiological, statistical rationale. And like, how would we prove that, the work that they've done is maybe incorrect, or that there's work that is intentionally not being funded, for example, or that is too difficult for researchers to explore. They don't have the data to explore. So there's a lot of questions.
Yeah. In fact, actually, there's there are so many questions about this, but there's also so much empirical data about it too. Tim says, considering the fact that we're in late stage capitalism, where the system is struggling to make return on investments, could these puzzles eventually dovetail into our economic bird dog path? And I don't know, should I play for the audience the question Tim recently asked Congressman McCormick on C-SPAN the other day, so people have a sense of what Tim means by the economics bird dog path?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would like to do bird dogging related to this issue too, and I think that it's good motivation.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is like, look at all the people in Congress who have been involved in fracking.
Yeah. I mean,
every week there are many, many people who we can really challenge.
Yeah, there are very few people in Pennsylvania who have actually spoken out against the industry, whether they're like in Congress or in the PA House or Senate.
Yeah, so this was the other day, and Tim, who's in the audience right now, asked this question. We've been organizing as a group to train people to do bird dogs.
Raleigh, North Carolina, Independent Line. Tim, good morning.
Oh, let me, I keep forgetting to put this on the screen. Let's go.
Independent Line. Tim, good morning.
Thank you so much for having me. I have a comment and a question for Congressman McCormick. My comment is, since GDP does not account for ecological or social negatives, such as air pollution, like greenhouse gases, why is it that no matter Republican or Democrat, everybody wants unlimited economic growth on a finite planet that is driving the climate emergency? Could you please explain how we are going to live without a habitable planet? I think we're on track for hitting 2 degrees Celsius by the middle of next decade. So let's conserve life on the planet, please.
Yeah.
What do you say?
So my dad was a forest ranger. I'm a conservationist like Teddy Roosevelt. I want to see the planet survive. But let's have a realistic conversation about that. There's always going to be an emergency, whether it be a war or climate change or whatever you want to call it. Actually, there's a really good book called The Creature from Jekyll Island, which talks about the Federal Reserve, how it was created, what kind of things we use as emergencies to grow the budget, to spend more than we should. This climate change idea, which has kind of become a religion, has been used as an excuse to overspend dramatically, where you can spend $1 trillion on greenhouse gases. And let's see how that's worked, by the way. Since you want to talk about greenhouse, let's have a realistic conversation about why the Earth is warming. I would state that your greenhouse gases, which you're talking about, carbon dioxide, methane makes up 0.0007% of the entire atmosphere. Now, you're going to eliminate all the cows and all the animals and everything else that produce methane, including ourselves. Is that your solution to tackling 0.0007% of the atmosphere? Or is it the carbon dioxide, which produces, I think it constitutes of 0.04% of the entire environment? 11% of that is from humans, by the way. And from that, 14% of that from the United States. And from that, 29% from all of our automobiles, all of our planes, all of our trains, all of our ships. So if you want to eliminate all the stuff that the United States produces by spending $1 trillion into debt and ruin our economy, and then we can control everything that's going on, and we'll lose our influence in the world, by the way. And we're one of the cleanest energy producers in the world, by the way. But just all that, just to reduce the carbon emissions by 0.000167% of the atmosphere, you think that's going to actually affect global warming when you can actually look in the entire solar system? Right now, the other planets are warming too. Why is that? Is it the cars? Is it the carbon dioxide? Is it the methane? Of course not. Maybe we're having a solar flare. Maybe it's something, but I think you're putting all your eggs in the wrong basket. I don't disagree that there's climate change, but don't think that it's because of carbon emissions.
Yeah. So what do folks notice about this clip?
Yeah, I noticed that the religion.
Yeah. Tim says first he calls climate change an idea and a religion. I want to read back some past notes here. Mary said, yes, Mackenzie, Pittsburgh area health advocacy coalition finally won about cancer cluster young deaths there. Also see fracktracker.org for cross issues and Burke's gas truth in PA.
Yeah.
And Mary says moron. And then Tim suggests, can we request guests onto C-SPAN's Washington Journal? And then one thing from before also, for example, the UN moved the goalpost definition of poverty from the Rome Convention in order to say that neoliberal policies were solving hunger and poverty. So now it's getting to about the end here. Do we want to think of anything to wrap up here with? And Jay says, the expression he made when he literally threw out the solar system heating claim, haha, oh my God. Let's see.
Looking for. But just all that, just to reduce the carbon emissions by 0.000167% of the atmosphere, you think that's going to actually affect global warming when you can actually look in the entire solar system? Right now, the other planets are warming too. Why is that? Is it the cars? Is it the carbon dioxide? Is it the methane? Of course not. Maybe we're having a solar flare. Maybe it's something, but I think you're putting all your eggs in the wrong basket. I don't disagree that there's climate change.
That's a funny expression to notice.
Yeah, I think he like I can't tell if he believes it or not. Like he is definitely like speaking passionately about it. Like, you know, we were talking about this last time. He's using all of these like industry playbook tactics of like, you know, transitioning from saying, "Oh, you know, there is climate change, but maybe it's not human caused." And like all of these different ways of trying to confuse people and make them like to sow doubt, but yeah, it makes you wonder like if he really does believe it or not.
Oh my God, Mary. Maple says guy needs LSD in a room with a climate scientist. Oh. And Jay says they know these are manipulated pseudoscience statements. Yeah.
Yeah, whenever he was like 0.006, like you could tell you're just making up a fucking number. Like it was so obvious.
I think Tim actually looked up his numbers, and his numbers are actually correct. It's not that his numbers are wrong, but like, what does he mean by his numbers?
Yeah, I mean,
what's
like,
he trying to say? They're just small numbers. So what? Like, what is that? Like, what? So what? Everybody. I'm noticing many people saying car sales type. So, do we have any last thoughts for this tonight, or is there anything else? This has been pretty productive. Any last thoughts from you, Mackenzie, or from the audience?
not really.
Yeah, we've got so much more we can work on, and so much we have learned. So, thank you everybody so much for coming out tonight. I really love to learn together, and look forward to seeing you on Sunday again. On Thursday night, we're going to be streaming some coding stuff at 8 p.m. Central. We're also going to be teaching on meetup.com. And Jay says, bye now before it's too late. And then there was much merriment. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much. And don't forget, we're going to have a book club in 2 weeks, reading Amity and Prosperity. So feel free to message us about this. And also, by the way, as you're coming, don't forget to visit our website and donate. Donating helps us do more of this work, organize more slides, cut more video. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. Visit our website, codewhatever.us. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night. Bye.
Bye.